Major support for these broadcasts is provided by Bank of America Merrill Lynch and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, KILROY Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, M&T Bank. Additional support is provided by AVR Realty Company, LLC, All Nation Renovation, Bingham McCutcheon, LLP, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, CASSIDY TURLEY, C.B. Richard ELLIS, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, Chelsea Lighting, Cushman and Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, DDG Partners, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Friedman LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns and Gian Tomasi, Investors Bank, Jack Jaffa and Associates, Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Corman Communities, Madison Realty Capital, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Massey KNAKAL Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Site Comply, Sterling and Sterling, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, the Wickoff Group, Urban American, Ackman Ziff Real Estate, Eastern Consolidated, Goldman Properties, the Moinian Group, Muss Development, RAL Development Services, the Spandrel Group, LLC, Triangle Equities.
Where do you grow up in Brooklyn to become a painter? A painter, not a painter, an artist, a painter, and not somebody who's painting, Morris Catsup in the Catskills. Where I'm talking about a painter who's world-renowned, who's in the Met, who's been around the world. I'm happy today that I have a painter who is my friend, Archie Rand. Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here, Mike. Pleasure, thank you.
And I'm so happy to truly have a world-renowned painter, especially since I'm a kid growing up in Brooklyn, and I never really knew what a museum was, but you did. Now, I was watching Boardwalk Empire, and you were telling me that your grandfathers were involved with bootlegging.
Yes. In fact,
and I heard Waxy Gordon last night.
Oh, really? Yeah. Waxy Gordon was a client of my grandfather's, and the name Nookie Thompson actually once came up in my household, so I was shocked. I thought it was something my father had made up. My grandfather had a bar under the Brooklyn Bridge, and whenever the sailors came in from overseas, they were apparently very long trips, they would run into the bar, drop all their money, rip all the fixtures off the wall, and kill each other. And my grandfather sold a lot of whiskey, and when Prohibition came, as my father said, he put the lock on the front door and opened the back door. And he was what my wife euphemistically refers to as a chemist. And his job was to go down to the docks where the Lundy brothers were in Sheepshead Bay, where the police would help unload the stuff from Sam Bronfman up in Canada, the Seagrams, or if Joe Kennedy was bringing in Johnny Walker. And then he would take one bottle and turn it into 5. And as such, he was...
He's a true chemist.
Yes, he was a true chemist, I mean, it's laughable in these days, but... And my family didn't talk about this. These are things that my brother and I figured out over years of piecing together family stories, little snippets that we'd hear.
Let's talk about your dad. Your dad he worked in one of the liquor stores, right? Later?
Yeah. My father was a musician. He was a flutist. He had a Philharmonic scholarship. He either knew or studied with, I never got the story straight, Kincaid and Barrere, who were great, great flautists. He knew at an early age Julius Baker, the composer William Schumann. I'm not sure whether he actually played in the Philharmonic or not, but when the Depression came, he did not have a profession. The Philharmonic itself was cut, and he bounced around, apparently. He worked in the American Can Company. A lot of my father's history is very vague. It was just not talked about.
Now, but you said your father worked like 6 days a week.
Yes, yes, that's later. He was drafted. He ran the PX in Guam during World War II, came back and worked in a liquor store that my grandfather had opened up when Prohibition was repealed. And he worked 6 days a week in this liquor store. He basically stocked it with wines.
Now, the interesting thing is, you said in order to be with your dad, and you wanted to be with your dad, was that you would spend the day, because he would also paint.
Yes, my father was actually a pretty remarkable amateur painter. He had a lot of talents. He worked 6 days a week, and the only day that he wasn't in the store was on Sundays. On Sundays, he would do one of three things. He would either do something cultural with the family. He would take us to museums or restaurants where we would sit and judge the restaurant. He would smell the wine and judge the service and stuff. It was very weird, but it was never just for fun. We were always going to like get a cultural experience in a restaurant or a concert or a play, or he'd stay home with us and we'd read from Hawthorne or Shakespeare. This was his idea of how to spend Sunday with the kids. Or he would play flute, whereupon he was untouchable. He would play flute all day Sunday, and we just couldn't talk to Dad. That's what he did. Or he would paint. And he painted somewhat like the American Impressionist Ernest Lawson, who's not a household name, but that's the painter his work most looked like. He loved the Brooklyn Museum, which was full of these turn-of-the-century Americans. And at a very early age, pre-kindergarten, I realized that if I wanted to be with my father on those days, I couldn't hang out with him when he played flute. When he took us out, we went out. But on those Sundays where he painted, I could just hang out in the basement where his studio was and hang out. And I didn't say anything. I just watched. And finally, he relented. I must have been 3 or 4. He'd give me some masonite and some palette knives and some brushes and squeeze some paint out and say, here, do it. And I loved it. I would paint with him, and he would encourage me.
Now, you said to me that you were a, we would call it a trumpetnik when you were going to public school. You kicked the teacher in the shins.
You have a remarkable memory.
I mean, you weren't the easiest student, and I think the teacher realized that the best thing for young Archie Rand was let the kid paint.
Yes. The first day of kindergarten, I had no desire to go to school. And I remember the first day of class. I remember all the teachers' names, but I won't say them. My teacher said, oh, hello, how are you? And I kicked her in the shins, turned to my mother and said, I want to go home. I wasn't crying, I was angry. And that was the afternoon teacher. The morning kindergarten teacher was a genius, and she picked up on me immediately, and she took me over and said, would you like to paint? And I figured, cool. And I think I spent the rest of my elementary and high school career with the teachers knowing that if they wanted to keep me quiet, they should put me there.
Now, you were really good. You were a smart student because you graduated at 15. But before that, we have to talk. You were bar mitzvahed. Where did you go to Hebrew school?
The Yeshiva of Bensonhurst, 79th Street between 20th and 21st Avenue. They had a full-time after-school Talmud Torah program. So we would go to school, come back, have milk and cookies, and then go off to 2 or 3 hours of Hebrew instruction.
And you used to go with your mother on Saturday to temple, right?
No, my mother didn't go. It was my brother and
Your
I
brother and you.
would go to basically Orthodox services. It was an Orthodox congregation. Every Saturday, until about a year after I was bar mitzvahed, we went every Saturday, just my brother and I.
Now, you went to Lafayette High School?
Yes, I did, where I met my wife. Lafayette was an amazing place, amazing. It's closed now, unfortunately, because of its murder rate. But when we were there, I was the class of 65. It was an astounding place to be, very creative. I went to school with, I worked with Rhea Perlman in the grade advisor's office. Dave Liebman, who ended up with Miles Davis, I was in the band that he ran. Mike Garson, who ended up with David Bowie. Steve Gelfer, who was in Cats. Marcia Malamet, who writes for Barbra Streisand. It was just an unbelievably creative place.
Yeah, but you graduated, a number of years. You graduated like you were 15 and a half.
Yeah.
And then you decided to go to City College for like 6 months, right? What happens?
City College was another amazing place. The City College uptown campus, I met some of the most brilliant intellects, some of whom became lifelong friends. Again, another great music scene. This was the mid-1960s, 1966. Wonderful poets. I'd never met full-time poets before. But I found that there was a way to do school, and a lot of good students know this, and it's unfair because it's like having a certain kind of athletic ability. That is, you walk into class, you look at the teacher, and you say, oh, I get this teacher's attitude, this is the text that they're using, this is the take that they have on it, this is the kind of humor or non-humor they have, and this is the kind of student response this teacher expects. So I found I didn't really have to study very hard and I could pull A's, and I just didn't want to spend 4 years doing that. I wanted to do something harder.
So what do you do? 16.
I was under draft age at the time. It was during the Vietnam War. And I went to work at the 8th Street Record Center. I loved records.
Well, you spent a number of years, but was...
Yes, and all my paychecks. My wife says to me that I buy real estate to accommodate my record collection. I have 45,000 LPs, which I started collecting when I was working at the record center. It was very exciting. It was in Greenwich Village, and met a lot of interesting people. And to keep my academic training up, I took some classes at Pratt Institute in the evening. And then I decided to go full-time to the Art Students League.
Art Students League. And what happens at the Art Students League? You met so many people, some of the world-renowned artists of that time.
Well, that was as a result of the Art Students League. I was told by some of the people at Pratt Institute to study with certain instructors, and I looked them up and realized they were rather traditional illustrators. And I wanted to be an artist all my life. And I looked at the list of instructors, and there were 2 artists there whose work I'd known, which were very opposite kinds of work, and I signed up for both of them. One was the figurative painter Leonard Anderson, with whom I became very close, and the other was the contemporary abstract painter Larry Poons, whose work I wasn't particularly familiar with. He was known at the time for op art, making these little dots against brightly colored backgrounds. My Aunt Helen remembered his work when I signed up for his class and said, oh, that's the guy who paints amoebas, and she laughed. But I figured this guy is a contemporary painter, I'll learn something.
Now, didn't Poons tell you one day to paint like 50 pictures?
Actually, it was the second week of class. The first week I was there, he said, paint something. I painted a picture, and he said, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is, he said, the bad news is this isn't a good painting. He said, the good news is there's so much stuff in this painting that each one of these elements is good for 100 pictures, so you'll never go dry. And I thought that was a pretty encouraging thing to say. He'd point to a certain brushstroke here and say, this is good for 100, 200 pictures, a certain line. And then the next week he said, I said, what should I do? He said, paint 50 pictures. And he walked out. He was a tough guy, motorcycle jacket.
And then?
Painted 50 pictures. I don't know how. I don't even know how I could afford it.
And then he said, paint 100 pictures.
Then he came back the next week, and he went through them like this, and he said, paint 50 more. And I painted 50 more. And third or fourth week of class, he comes back, and he says, hey, kid, come here. And takes me out in the hall and says, what are you doing here? And I said, I figured this is it. I'm being thrown out of the Art Students League. I said, I want to be a painter. He said, you want to be a painter? You just did 100 paintings in 2 weeks. That's more than most painters do in 10 years. And I said, but you told me to. And he said, yeah, but I was kidding.
How do you get to the gallery at 18?
I was rooming on the Upper East Side with 2 of my classmates at the Art Students League. And every night that it was available, they would go to Warhol's factory, where there were always parties going on. This is 67 or so, 66 actually. And they would come home, and I'd be painting all the time. I'd say, look, guys, you're making all these contacts, but if you don't have any work, nothing's going to happen. I said, you got to be a painter. I was sort of a teenage old man. I was hanging out with these ex-abstract expressionists, and these guys were hanging out with all of these newer painters. And one night, my roommate comes back and says, I met this very famous dealer at a party. And he said to me, I'd love to see your work. And I said to him, are you kidding? I don't have any work. You want to look at somebody's work? Look at Archie Rand. He's got all the work. So it's a complete fluke. I never underestimate the amount of luck and the amount of gratitude that one should have in any field.
And so you exhibited, what, 18?
I was 16 when I showed my first piece at a rather well-known gallery called the Tibor Denage Gallery, which is still in existence on the 57th Street area. It's still a very famous and prestigious gallery. Tibor passed away. It's run by two people who had worked for him and with him, and they inherited the gallery, and they still run it. So it's a very old gallery. It was opened in 1947. And at the time that I showed, well, basically what happened was, as I walked in, and again, this is actually a kind of funny story. It's a matter of luck. Tibor had asked me to bring in some paintings. So I brought in some paintings. I rolled them out on the floor. They weren't stretched. They were larger paintings. And Tibor said, stretch that and hang it in the back room. So I figured, oh, this is the way it's done. I'm 16. I've been painting for a year. I know I'm a genius. Now I'm waiting for the Metropolitan Museum to call, you know. And what I didn't know, a painter named Joyce Kozlov told me many years later, who showed at the gallery. And she said, oh, you were the first, I was the second. I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, Tibor was having a fight with his director. And he said, after 20 years, I want to pick some of the artists. And the director said, no, you're not. And he said, well, I'm the money, I'm the name on the door, I want to pick some artists. And the director said, you pick one artist, I'm out of here. And he said, to heck with you, buddy. And then she said, and you were the first, and I was the second.
Now, at that time is when you did the letter paint?
I had started to do the letter paintings. I showed the letter paintings, again, in the back room in 1968. I had started them in 67. The letter paintings were a continuation of figurative work that I was doing that had sort of morphed into Matisse, where the lines weren't connected, or Matisse's influence. And those unconnected lines became kind of hieroglyphs and
I mean,
letters.
you put the Shirelles in the letter paintings?
I didn't put I put the Chantels.
The Chantels,
Yes,
right.
I love the Chantels. Arlene Smith and the Chantels.
So now you go to...
You're amazing.
You go to Pratt, right?
I became draft age. I became 18. And as we all remember, there was this rather unfair but useful 2S clause, where if you were enrolled in a college, they wouldn't draft you. So I had enough credits from City College and from Pratt Evening to transfer in and make me a kind of combination sophomore, junior, freshman or something. And I took a year and a half of courses, and I majored in animation. They called it scenographics, and we worked on the early Sesame Streets. It wasn't called Sesame Street, it was the Children's Television Workshop. And we built our own animation stands. It was very exciting. And I minored in topography, which linked up to my interest in letters, which I still have.
So when do you run into Maria again? Maria went to high school with you.
Yes.
Who subsequently you married.
Yes. Maria and I went to high school together. We broke up, and I'm on the way into the gallery to see Tibor on the train. And in the corner of my eye, I look down the train and I see it's Maria. And I fix my gaze on her, and she looks back at me, and we link up. She was going to, I believe, Hunter College. And I called up Tibor, and I canceled my appointment, and she cut school, and we went to Staten Island on the ferry, and we took the trains back and forth in Staten Island, and soon after we were married.
Now, but you know, this is really, you know, everything is, the term I think in Yiddish is beschert.
Beschert, yes.
Okay, beschert. And what happens, Maria had a daughter.
Yes.
Who was going to the yeshiva of Flatbush.
Well, my daughter Elena was 3, I believe, 3 or 4 at the time we were married. And Maria insisted that she have a consistent religious and community upbringing. Maria's family is Sicilian, and we found out later that they're Marranos, which is fascinating. But Maria insisted that the children get a Jewish education. So we got Elena into the yeshiva of Flatbush, which was a very prestigious and very expensive school. And Maria was on the board of directors of the Ladies Auxiliary.
But the poor Jewish artist didn't have any money.
There was a magnificent director at the yeshiva of Flatbush named David H. Schwartz, who was a genius. Dave Schwartz would do things like he would get an entire subway train from the city of New York and run parties on it, so the subway train would ride around all night with catered food. He was a genuine maniac.
So what happens?
The tuition was ridiculously high. It was a great school. And Dave said to me, I see you're a painter. I said, yeah. He said, I saw your reviews in the Times. I know you're the real thing. I said, okay. He said, we have this kickoff dinner where we get all the donors together, and then it's the dinner that precedes the annual dinner at the Hilton. I want you to do something for me. I said, anything, because I was getting an enormous cut. I mean, I paid something, but, you know, was a huge discount. He said, I want you to paint murals in the auditorium. Well, the auditorium had walls that were about 30 feet high and 50 feet long. And I said, get me the materials and I'll do it. So on the basketball court, one of the machers there donated rolls of bedsheet material, which we had sewn together. And I came up with a theme. And the theme of the first mural was the prophets. I did the 12 prophets, 30 feet by 50 feet. Large-scale painting, by the way, was something you inherited from the contemporary cultural scene. Everyone at that time was trying to see if they could make the biggest painting after Jackson Pollock. You had Jules Zalitsky, people. So making a big painting was an exciting challenge to me. And the fact that it was on a Jewish theme didn't faze me at all. I researched whatever I could on the prophets, and I did this big painting where the 12 major prophets were done. And the next year, he said, do it again. And I did another 30 by 50 foot mural of famous Jews in American history. Yeah, American history. And at this dinner, there was a person sitting next to Dave, and it turns out later that he was colorblind. And he said to Dave, are these things any good? He says, oh, this guy's a genius. He's terrific. They're wonderful. Because he said, I can't tell. He said, you tell me. He said, why are you asking? He said, well, I'm building a synagogue. I don't like the synagogue I'm in right now. It's the old story. You don't like it, you build your own. And I'm going to put up wood paneling. And Dave said, no, don't put up wood paneling.
No, I think that the better comment is that you said. I didn't realize it was Dave come up. You know, they needed something better than wood paneling on the concrete walls, cinder block walls.
Well, the guy that was building it was very practical. He figured, I just want a place where people can come and pray. I don't care if it's elegant or anything. And the most inexpensive and practical thing to do is wood paneling. And Dave said to him, don't be crazy. You've got the world's greatest artist here. And he was...
But, you know, let's talk about this because what you did, I mean, that's your first major Judaic piece of work, the B'nai Yosef.
B'nai Yosef, yeah.
On Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn. And this took you 3 years of your life.
Right.
To paint, what, 13, how many?
18,000 square feet.
18,000 square feet. But what Archie Rand did was more interesting than that. In order for you to figure out what to paint, you went down to the Lakewood Yeshiva, the world-renowned...
the Sifta Gavoa, yeah.
And you spent time learning the Talmud, learning the Kabbalah, learning all of this, and painting this 18,000 square feet.
Right.
Now, the interesting situation is... under Judaic law or Hebraic law, you really can't paint images, correct?
Actually, no.
Oh, okay, but
that,
there was
that was the
question.
perception of that was the
and then
perception.
there was this world renown. I mean, anyone in Judaic understands Reb Moshe Feinstein.
Yes.
And basically, Reb Moshe Feinstein had a meeting with you, and they
not with me. I wasn't
with them,
right?
With the rabbis and everybody to say if this was halakhically approved for the synagogue. Yeah,
that was. I hadn't realized when I took the job on. I thought it would be 6 months and I'd be through with it. I looked at it and said I could paint this, and I didn't realize that there was no precedent for it. That the last thematically mural synagogue was discovered in the 1920s in Dura Europos in Syria, and nothing since then had been done. There had been words and a couple of symbolic things painted, but nobody had thematically covered a synagogue in murals for 2,000 years. So there was no set of laws. And after I took the commission, I said, oh my, I'm in trouble. And I wanted to do it right. It was an Orthodox congregation. I wanted to do something that I knew was precedent setting. So I wanted to do it kosher. I wanted to do it according to the law. But the law was very hard to find. So I researched what I could, and then I went down to the Lakewood Yeshiva because I realized that what I'm going to do is going to set the precedent for whatever follows. It better be right. And I immersed myself with people slightly younger than myself. I was about 24, and there's nothing more animated than an 18 to 22-year-old yeshiva student. You know, they have all the energy of youth and all the commitment and passion. And I had a whole team of people working with me who were very excited. And I said, this is what I'm looking for. This is the kind of thing I need. And
but that was the start of it. I mean, then over the period of time, you did the 18 sections of the Amida.
Yes.
Okay.
What happened was, after the B'nai Yosef murals, I found that my former colleagues in the art world were averse to that work, and they were treating me differently because I was doing two things that were not currently fashionable. I was working religiously, which was absolutely untouchable, and I was working figuratively, which oddly enough was totally out of favor. And I kept thinking to myself, what is it that's bothering these people so much? I mean, it's art. I was getting paid for 3 years to be an artist, which was more than I could say for any of my friends. It was a regular gig like the WPA. I said, you know, what's your problem? And I thought, something is here that's bothering a lot of people. So I decided to do some more work based on scriptural or liturgical themes, realizing that I had 2,000 years of commentary to draw on that no artist had touched.
With 3 minutes left, I have to talk about some of that
Serious
work.
time goes so quickly.
Yeah, well, I mean, because you then changed, some of your work has been, you know, Judaic with comic strip concept.
Yes. Yes, my point is that for the first 20 years or so that I was working with Judaic themes, I was doing what most Jewish artists do, which is I was acting subservient to the textual. I was letting the visual illustrate the text in deference to the rabbinic tradition. And I realized that that was not going to make memorable art because the verbal had dominance. So I realized that what I had to do was make the visual the most important thing, and the verbal would just have to take second place, which is a very radical thing to do in Judaism.
Is that how you did the 54?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The 54 was the first time I did that, the 54 chapter paintings.
54 chapter paintings.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years ago, you did the 613 commandments.
613 mitzvahs, yeah.
The mitzvahs.
Which is 17 feet high and 100 feet long. It's an enormous painting.
And then what about, you know, in the Passover Haggadah story, the God...
The Haggadah, yes. I did the Haggadah because I was tired of seeing...
The one kid.
Yeah, artist after artist do the kid, the goat, the bull, and not realizing this is, you know, this song, I mean, they sing this song in Sicily. There's an attempt.
Right, and the interesting thing is, I mean, on the slaughter, the last print, you took the old Nazi art
Yeah.
of showing the Jew with the star.
Yeah, my feeling is that you have the angel of death, and usually it's portrayed metaphorically. It's like too terrible to talk about. And I thought, you know, in our lifetime, we have an angel of death. And if I actually have the nerve to put it up there and see how it feels.
With 1 minute, you are world-renowned. You're in art. You're in Metropolitan. You've been in all of these other places. You've done murals also in Chicago, in Jerusalem, and other places. You've been married to Maria for how many years? 38 something. 38 years. Okay. You have Elena.
Yes,
your daughter.
my daughter Elena, my son Benjamin. I have Elena's children, Maxim and Gabriella, and Benjamin's son Sam.
And I got to say something. I've never had an artist, and I'm very happy to have an artist and a friend by the name of Archie for being here today. Thank you.
I'm deeply honored to be here. It's great to see you, Mike. Thank you.